Hey, so I'm here with John Bolecek, who's wrote a piece for the Sick Times, which chronicles long COVID and ME/CFS and related conditions. And he wrote a piece calling for retraction of the controversial effort preference construct in the NIH's big deep phenotyping study of 17 ME/CFS patients. And so, John, hi, thanks for being here. And first, why don't you just tell me why you were interested in sort of doing this deep dive into this particular aspect of that study?
Um, Thanks a lot, David. Um, I, well, in February, when the NIHME study came out, I was one of these people like waiting it. People had said, there's drug targets, and I pulled it up and I read it, and I just couldn't believe my eyes when I saw all this stuff about effort preference in there. And so, it ticked me off, and um, a month or two go by, and I really hadn't seen any writing about it.
Mhm.
And I saw Sick Times had like a call for suggestions for articles, and so I wrote them an email, and
And
a little bit later they wrote back and said, yeah, that we'd like to do one. In the meantime, Jeannette Burmeister had created a whole series of blog posts and stuff. So it was, getting a lot more coverage
right,
by
so
the
that was like
time
a
this ramped up.
a four blog kind of blockbuster
Right.
analysis. And so, and also, I guess there was a lot of discussion on the science for ME form,
Hmm.
who I think appeared and
Yep.
had some feedback.
Yeah, I wasn't following it before I, sort of agreed to do this on there, but afterwards, that was the most um, useful piece of information. I mean, it was 30, I think there's still 34 pages of
Comment.
posts and analysis and all the stuff those um, members have done, and they're extremely smart. And I mean, I should note, the arguments that I present in this piece are not, um, you know, my own. I kind of distilled them and broke it down and chose exactly how to write them. But these are arguments that have been made on the Science for ME forum and by Jeannette before that.
So, thank you for offering that credit. So why don't we just discuss briefly, the effort preference test is fairly complicated, but why don't you sort of discuss briefly what it involved? It involved the choice of hard and, what the hard.
Okay, yeah, this might be a good time to share my screen because there's a slide that shows what it's like.
Hmm.
So yeah, the it's called the EEfRT, kind of a play on effort without the O in it in that acronym. But it's this game, and normally it's 20 minutes. They changed it to 15 minutes for purpose of this ME study, which I'll give them credit. That was an excellent decision to do because I took this, and I couldn't wait to have the 15 minutes over.
Okay.
Um, but anyway, yeah, you get assigned this computer game, and you can choose either a easy task or a hard task. You can see under B, low effort was $1 and the hard was $2.37. And every time you play this over 15 minutes, and if you choose the low effort task, you use your dominant hand index finger and have to do, I think it's, what does it say?
30 button presses in 7 seconds.
Yeah, and the hard is like
Right.
98 and 21. And so
That's using the
um
non-dominant little finger as opposed to the dominant index finger.
exactly. And so you just do that over and over and over. And the only thing you get out of this is between $2 and $8.24. Um So if you see the low, like, and not everyone you get actually gets recorded as like a win trial.
Right,
So basically, you're populating this big bucket of values, and then in the end, two of them are randomly chosen, and you're given that amount of money.
right,
So um, the low effort takes a lot less time than the high effort. So people make a decision, and also sometimes the probability is low. So if you'd have shown me this one, I probably wouldn't have done the low effort just to skip because it's only $2.37.
right.
If it was up around $3, $4, I probably would have tried for it. If the probability was really low, you know, is another reason to kind of skip it, do a low effort, and try to go to the high effort one.
Right. And so what does any of this have to do with, ME or MECFS? And I think
I
that's
don't know.
what
This is a test validated in depressive disorders. Um, and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but anhedonia in his specifically, which is kind of like the lack of interest in doing things.
yeah.
And
Anhedonia is,
um,
yeah, it's a sort of an underlying kind of, or dysthymia, kind of an underlying lack of pleasure, essentially.
yeah, so that's what this was validated in. It was validated in
Among
college students, so who are primarily 18 to 22 or something like that. Maybe there were some older ones, but people with a lot of energy. So it's kind of exact opposite of what you would see here.
And also it's significant that in the original study, that sort of presenting this as a test for effort expenditure, um, the authors wrote that it really requires that both the controls and the people being
Yeah,
tested have equal physical ability. And in fact, that's really not the case in here. So in that sense,
right.
and that you sort of had a conversation or an email exchange with the initial author who sort of confirmed that notion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing just because I
Okay.
maybe flash the screen. But I was trying to find a slide that had that. But
Well,
yeah, I emailed Michael Treadway, who's a professor at Emory, and asked, and he kind of said that if if people with ME that made a rational decision because they could not complete the or could not complete the hard tasks, switch to easy task, it would not support NIH's effort preference claims.
which let's just be clear that the first of all, Emory University for people not in the U.S. or for people in the U.S. who don't know, is Emory University is in Atlanta, a very well-known university.
Hmm.
And the main finding, as presented, that there was an effort preference problem, or a core trait of MECFS was an effort preference issue, was based on the idea that people with that the patients, the small number of patients in the study, um, chose fewer hard tasks,
Yep.
more easy tasks than the controls, which presumably, right, that's it right there. The one defining feature of MECFS was an alteration of effort preference rather than physical or central fatigue due to dysfunction of so on. They came up with some postulation, with some speculations about why this was happening. But the point was that there's a completely rational reason why people with MECFS would have chosen fewer hard tasks, as we've sort of discussed. But why don't we go through
Right.
the 5 points that you raised in your piece about
Okay.
if it should be retracted?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think it's worth looking at this abstract and in the context of how the entire paper and really make your head spin. So this right here that's circled, that's the third sentence of the abstract. The first one basically says, here's what post-infectious ME/CFS is. They call it a disorder, not a disease, which I thought was kind of weird. But so they say ME/CFS is this poorly defined disease, or like not poorly defined, but anyway, they used rigorous criteria to recruit the patients and match controls to conduct deep phenotyping. They did all these tests. And then this third sentence is what they choose to highlight, which to me is crazy because the data just doesn't support it. They
Yeah,
read the sentence that you just said, and it's all about this effort preference. And then it said the second sentence is basically they didn't find anything in the muscles. Um, and then the third sentence is due to um, problems with the brain.
you mean the third
Then
clause?
the fourth
The third,
sentence,
so
what's that?
the third clause, not the third
Oh
sentence.
yeah, the third clause is absolutely. And then they kind of get into some of the other tests they did, more about the immune system and stuff. But the fact that this was chosen as the third sentence to me is should not have passed peer review.
I think the other
So,
thing
and we can
about it that,
get into these 5 reasons why.
well, let me also just make one other point, I think, to point
Mhm.
out that effort preference was not part of the original study. That was something that they themselves sort of developed as their construct out of the study, as I understand it.
I don't 100% follow that.
Um,
I
um,
mean,
that effort preference, the construct,
oh,
the,
the
the
term,
term
yeah,
effort
the term
preference
does
is what
not
they, right,
appear in the original literature involved in that test. That term effort preference.
right, that's what I mean. And so that particular construct framed that way, I think is particularly insulting to patients who've had to live with the term chronic fatigue syndrome for decades now,
Yeah,
because of stupidity on the part of the Centers for Disease Control.
I
Um,
know.
and
I
so,
almost feel
I,
bad using it, just using the term or just in general because it's
yeah,
kind of to me it doesn't mean anything.
and it's tone deaf with this population. Even if that is what you meant, it's completely tone deaf. So, having said that, let's go on to your five
Oh,
reasons.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll just, this is that same sentence again, broken into 3 different colors. We'll come back to this when we talk about it and sort of remind people where
Okay,
we had
okay,
talked about it. But this is their main chart to show this so-called effort preference, which is probability of choosing a hard task versus the easy one.
right.
And if you just take that data, this
I
is
think
done with what's called a GEE, generalized estimating equation. So it looks like, oh yeah, the people with MECFS are way lower. I mean, if you break the data out by trial, it really doesn't look that different.
well, I think
Um,
this could be. Let's actually move on to the specific. Okay, here the specific.
okay, yeah, here we go. Anyway, but yeah, so number one is, I mean, there's a validated method to measure effort already, and it's done when you do a cardiopulmonary exercise test, and it's called the respiratory exchange rate, and it's sort of if that gets above 1.1, yeah, that means you've kind of gone into, I think, anaerobic, where
Mhm.
you're burning, I guess,
You're not.
sugars at that point.
Right.
But anyway, it means you're working really hard. And they did this test. They only did it on 8 people with ME, but 7 of them got to this 1.1. So I just don't understand how you can say there's this thing there's nothing wrong with your muscles. There's this thing in your brain limiting how hard you can exert when we have data showing they exerted really hard. There's actually a clause in the paper where they caveat this, and they say effort preferences when you're not under supervision, which because during the CPET test, they have them work really, there's like, keep going,
Oh,
work really hard, so they're like, well, maybe you can overcome it if someone's really encouraging you,
I see.
which
Okay. Okay.
is kind of insulting. But yeah, these graphs show all sorts of big differences between, peak power and all sorts of things between the healthy controls and the people with ME.
Okay, so one is that there's a validated test, which is the 2-day CPET, and when it comes to ME/CFS, to sort of show the difference that happens after post-exertional malaise. And so, given that, one of
Yeah.
the reasons why people are reluctant to do that, though, is because it does cause further harm. And I suppose there is a rationale for trying to find a way to come up with similar findings that doesn't cause harm. Which, if the if the effort preference test was, reliable, that would make sense. But since it seems to be completely misapplied in this term, it doesn't. But there is some reason to want to avoid CPETs if one can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did a 2 day CPET. I would never do one again.
So,
I mean, that was painful and terrible afterwards. And they NIH used the argument that we didn't want to put people in further post-exertional malaise by doing a 2 day CPET. But by only doing a 1 day, they were able to put that second clause in there rather than physical or central fatigue. Because if you go, this is just a list of all the 2 day CPET studies that have happened. I mean, there's been a ton of them.
right.
This was started in 2016, so there were 4 studies showing a decline on the second day when they started the study. So they should have known. Since then there's been, I don't know, at least 10 more. And they
Well,
still are not including a 2 day CPET in the long COVID work. And to I would say in the context of doing this study, doing a 2 day CPET might have been impossible without making it more expensive because they're doing 2 weeks of testing at NIH. You're staying over, you're doing 8 hours of testing a day. It's super important in a 2 day CPET for the first day to be non-fatiguing. So you're basically fresh.
right. Well,
I don't see how you could do a second day CPET and then another week's worth of testing after that. You would need rest. So you'd have to have like a third visit or something. But
so basically, what we're saying is there are structural issues involved in doing a 2 day CPET, but without doing the 2 day CPET, they can't really make the claims that they're making.
yeah, I would, yes, exactly.
Okay, so let's move
And
on.
I mean, I think the 2 day CPET is the, one of the gold standard findings, this decline on the second day. So, I mean, if you're doing the seminal work on ME, not including it to me still is a problem.
Okay, so let's move on to point number two.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, point number two is the crux of it all. That's just what makes the whole thing fall apart, and is that the findings fail to take into the fact that the ME patients are sick and they just don't have the same physical ability as the healthy patients. You brought up the third bullet here before. In the creator of the test said it's important that it measures differences in motivation rewards rather than individual differences in ability or fatigue. And what they've recommended for doing this test in the past is you calibrate the button pushing speed for every individual beforehand. And
That's
NIH didn't do that.
I mean, so you calibrate it for each individual, so it's
Yeah,
optimal for them. Well, that's very interesting.
yeah,
I think also just this point that he makes, it just seems de facto that it's completely inappropriate for this cohort, especially when you
yeah.
compare, as we've done here, with the SF-36 findings. I mean, we know that these are sick patients; they've already been through tests. Why on earth would you assume that they have the exact same physical ability as healthy controls? It makes no sense at all. Okay, so this is number two. Let's go to number three.
Yeah. And I mean, there's evidence. Basically, you know, these two first numbers are completed tests, not attempted tests. That
Right.
effort preference is attempted test. This is just, what they were able to complete. And it's a huge difference, 99% for the healthy, 65% for the hard. And
Mhm.
then you have the SF-36 form, which is kind of this generalized health form.
Right.
And the ME patients are super low compared to
Yeah,
the healthy
31
controls.
is very, very low. I mean,
Yeah.
65 was considered disabled enough to enter the PACE trial, so that's very low. Okay, so here's three.
So yeah, three is, by design, this is a problematic test. And we can show this by the strategy of one of the healthy controls. Basically, what this person did was these first 4 bars you see on the left, all green,
Mhm.
those are the practice runs.
So the
And
practice runs to try out before the ones are actually
yeah,
recorded
yeah, before
officially.
you actually start, they did 4 practice runs. This person aced them, they got both hard, they got both easy, and then the game starts. And what this person does is they immediately start failing easy tasks. You can see the 30 this line where I have the blue line, that's 30 button clicks.
Hmm.
They immediately start failing these easy tasks, especially when the hard task as the option is a low probability and a low value.
I see. Okay.
But as soon as a high value um, task comes up, like see this first one they chose $3.22, 88% chance of winning, they ace it. Um, and so then they're only picking these high value ones. And when it's a low value, they do the easy and they fail it so they can quickly get back to the one because the easy task takes
Right. So they're being smart.
less time. So they're trying to get as many high value, things in their bucket. And NIH threw this person's data out. They said they did not follow instructions.
So they're smart,
Um,
but they were cheating.
no, no, I wouldn't say they're cheating.
So I'm
There's
saying
no rule
cheating.
that's
They're
yes,
cheating. There's cheating in the sense that from the NIH,
yeah,
they're cheating because they didn't follow the rules, even though they're optimally following the rules to get the most rewards.
exactly. And the other thing is, it, you know, it doesn't really say in the paper why this person's data wasn't included or why it was excluded. And um, you know, most of the times when you do these things, you have a script and you read the same script to everybody. The gist that I've got from talking to people that have taken the test is they just sit you down and say, hey, we're going to do a computer game. Here's the read, the computer's going to tell you the instructions and then here you go. There's nothing about, you have to complete them all or you're going to get judged on the percentage of hard tasks you attempt. They don't say any of that stuff.
Well, it's not unknown in studies to take out an outlier if you sort of have reasons to think that they're,
Yeah. So
invalid. But I mean, you
we
should also
can,
provide you should also provide the information for what, or if you don't remove the outlier, what it is. But this
but
is a little confusing, I think. Well, I'm not sure that we need to really, yeah, what is this here?
I guess what I would just, in talking about the outliers, I mean, so here is um, this shown in a way. This is from the Science for ME form, excellent graph. Green means a successful completion, and a short one is an easy one, and a tall one is a hard one picked. Look at MECFS A right here, B, D, and H. These are people that attempted hard ones over and over and over and kept failing. Like
Mm.
look at MECFSH. They didn't complete a single hard trial, but they attempted it over and over and over, trying really hard to finally to do one. And they never were able to. Why isn't that person's data thrown out? That's an outlier. They weren't able to successfully complete a single hard task. You could say the same thing with D, you could say the same thing with A. So, if you want to play this game of small sample size and what should we throw out, I mean, there's plenty of to get into.
Okay, so that's number three. The number four.
Oh,
Uh,
and I mean, yeah, this just shows you the wait a minute, just the total amount they earned, and you can see healthy control F here, $3.79.
oh,
And
yeah, that
and
was,
really the key point with that person is they earn by far the most money. And so if the optimal strategy is invalid, the whole test is. That's a quote from the Science from ME forum. And
okay.
I agree with that. If the person who played the games the best results aren't valid, then the whole test is.
Okay,
Um
so
yeah, and number four just shows, the this kind of box and whisker chart of the distribution of the effort preference. And a third of the MECFS, if you look at the line of what they're considering effort preference, a third of the people with MECFS don't have it, and a third of the healthy controls do. So how is that a
so this is a
defining
proportion.
feature?
This is the proportion of people who, a proportion of hard task over easy tasks, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
which is what they define as effort preference. And my guess, my point is, you know, a defining feature to me is binary. You have it or you don't. You know, here's what the difference is. That this can't be a defining feature if the third of the healthy controls have this alteration of effort preference.
Hmm.
And then furthermore, look at the three um, outliers on the healthy controls. I mean, those are doing the heavy lifting here. So, you know, very small sample size,
So you, right.
outliers, a lot of overlap. I mean, just absolutely no basis to make that definitive claim at the beginning of the abstract.
Okay. And then your last point.
And the last one, you know, probably doesn't require as much explaining for our audience because it's the most obvious one, but, you know, this flies in the face of clinical reality. You know, this disease hits athletes hard, and you know, if anything, it's harder to try to pace effectively than it is to overexert and experience post-exertional malaise. So, you know, it can, you know, the
But basically, you're saying it doesn't apply on its face to the experience of people who are
yes,
experiencing post-exertional malaise.
absolutely.
I mean, I guess that also gets to the issue of the use of the term preference. I mean, they've sort of claimed they mean unconscious, whatever. But if that's what you mean, you don't use the word preference. I think, you know.
Right. I mean,
So they're
it
suggesting that.
can explain. I mean, what I've seen over and over is, you know, people's people deteriorate, you know, either temporarily or permanently. And it's almost always because of an immune trigger, you know, a subsequent COVID infection or a giant exertion, you know, and they'll decline. You know, effort preference has nothing to say to that cycle
Mhm.
of of exerting post-exertion malaise and kind of declining.
Okay, so John, what kind of response have you gotten to the piece?
Um, Not too much. I mean, you know, just some people saying, you know, thanks for distilling that down. You know, it's nice to have the uh, you know, the distilled version of this complex topic.
Mhm.
I can keep going with more points if you want though, or we can wrap it up.
I think we can well, if there's any other points that you want to make of particular significance,
Yeah, I
wrap it up.
just wanted to kind of follow up on this thing. Um, the the third clause here, due to dysfunction of integrated brain regions potentially associated with um,
Central catechol pathway.
central catechol pathway dysregulation. So, you know, they do the study did all these other tests too, you know, immune tests, blood tests. But two of the other tests was one was a functional MRI
Mhm.
where they, you know,
They see which
asked
brain.
questions and did an exercise while you're wearing this thing on your head.
Mhm.
And the other one was a grip strength test. And basically what they have done with this effort preference, you know, that first graph I showed, is they correlated that with every other test in they did, which to me, I don't understand why they're doing that because
What do you mean they?
they're
I don't understand what you mean exactly.
so you know this line, this trend line
Yeah.
of this decreased effort preference, you know, has this correlation, or you know, they're comparing it to the same thing when you do a grip test, when you do an fMRI. They're comparing that line. The problem is it's a super tiny sample size and it's a different patient group each time because not everybody does every single test. And it's done at a different time in a different state of post-exertional malaise. And it's unclear if it's related at all. So this quote at the bottom from John Moen, um, sums it up is they don't actually have any evidence that these two things are related to each other. All they know is that the observations track with each other, but we don't know why, we don't know how, and we don't know if it matters. So, famously, ice cream sales correlate with shark attacks. You know, just because two things are correlated doesn't mean they have anything to do with each other, right?
Right. But
Um,
yeah, that's a
but
basic
so they're just globbing this last sentence on to say, here's why there's effort preference.
So basically, you're
It-
saying that they're making causal claims from, or potential causal claims from their correlation data, and that they really don't have the authority to do that, given that it's correlations. But they're making presumptions about causal.
yeah, yeah. In a tiny sample size, done at different times, um, you know, and done with different people.
Okay.
So it's really this bold claim, and when you look at everything and how it's put together, it all falls apart.
Yeah, no, I think it's a real mess, and hopefully, the NIH has taken the concerns under advisement and will take some action, hopefully, to fix the issue. We can see. Okay, John, thanks very much. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.